So here we are today in the artist Sophie Axel's amazingly colourful home.
Do you mean shockingly colourful? You don't have to be polite.
Well, it was quite a surprise when you opened the front door.
That's how it's meant to be, really. A huge impact of colour on the senses. Electric pink, brilliant blue, and yellow for the hallway. In fact, all the walls in the house are different colours. It's so stimulating.
So would you say colour is the most important thing in your life, Sophie?
Absolutely. It's in me. I don't pay any conscious attention to it. It's who I am, what I have grown up with. It's like an internal microchip. For me, every number and every day has a colour. When I sleep, I even dream in colour. And I associate people with colours too.
I won't ask you what mine is. I noticed before that you've even got rainbow stairs.
Oh, the children adore them. It's their favourite place to play.
They're quite small, aren't they? You're not worried about them falling?
No, they're as sure-footed as goats, even the baby. Life is never without danger. I just leave them to it and they develop confidence at their own rate, as children should. They need to find themselves, especially if they're going to follow the family's artistic tradition.
You mean your family are artists too?
Not as such, but we're all very creative, especially the female side of the family. My grandmother was an actress. She's still alive. And my mother and aunt are furniture designers for quite famous international companies, actually.
So when you get together...
Oh, there's no stopping us. We're all very expressive in words, in clothes, in the environment we create in our homes.
Family gatherings must be something.
Oh, you're right there. When it comes to events such as festivals and birthdays, we dress up, find the best presents imaginable, and then wrap them magnificently. Oh, it's so exciting. And we have huge parties. But there's awful pressure to do something unusual too, and even more pressure from people around. For example, on Rosa's 3rd birthday...
That's your daughter?
Yes. I made a set of puppets to put on a show for her friends from playgroup. It took me days. Immediately, their parents asked me to put on shows for their children's birthdays too. And so it goes on.
And is Rosa creative as well?
Oh, yes. She adores painting. My mother came to stay recently and I found them both in the early morning chatting away about the colour of sunrise. There they were, grandmother and granddaughter, talking about colour as if they were absolute equals.
Quite an unusual topic. So let's talk about your own life a bit. I suppose you're a star student at art school?
Oh, you couldn't be more wrong. I was a total flop. At that time, there was no interest in design. It was all introspection and gloom and doom, and I just couldn't be moulded in that way. So I took off.
Literally?
Well, nothing too exotic. I went to work as a cook in a local hotel. I used to cycle there, and the pay was so low that when I got a puncture, I just couldn't pay for the repair. So I offered the man in the bike shop a poster advertising his repair service instead of money.
Did he accept?
Yes. In the middle of the picture was this completely flat tyre, and someone who saw it asked if he could use it to advertise a national charity bike ride.
That must have given you a boost.
Yes. I had several important poster commissions after that, including some for health education. I've had some other lucky breaks too. I designed some gift wrap for a stationery company, and a woman phoned who'd been given a book wrapped in my paper. She was an author and asked me to illustrate her book of fairy stories. So that's how I got into publishing. In fact, I'm just finishing a children's activity book that I've actually written and illustrated myself.
Part 2. When I visited a number of fruit farms in central England, I found broad agreement among most of the growers that these days it makes sense to move away from their traditional crops, such as apples, and into cherries instead. Now, in summertime, they have orchard after orchard of beautiful trees heavily laden with bright red fruit. UK cherry growers tend to choose the varieties which ripen slowly. This fruit may command a higher price because the harvest is not so early and there are always reliable buyers for it. Research is currently being carried out into ways of improving yield. A major obstacle to efficient production is the fact that growth may not be consistent from season to season. Sometimes the fruit only grows as big as a pea and then drops to the ground. Quite a few of the smaller trees are covered up against the rain and wind in a plastic tunnel. Older, larger trees have to take their chance out in the open, but cherries are a delicate fruit, and optimum weather conditions are needed to achieve the potential yield of 5 tons per hectare. The surface of the fruit has very little wax on it, so cherries need to be kept out of the rain as much as possible because the skin is liable to crack when water gets into it. If this occurs, the crop may be lost because the fruit bursts with a pop, rather like a balloon. When you're selecting the best cherries to buy, don't get them if they look at all tired or wrinkled, and buy the ones with a green stem. You'll find they taste much better than ones without. People often ask, how long does it take to get a decent crop from a cherry tree? Well, there are new varieties, laden with fruit, that are only 4 years old. But if you go back and read the old fruit-growing textbooks from the 1960s, they tell you cherries don't give a worthwhile crop till they're 12 years old. Some varieties go on cropping till they're 90. There are 3 new varieties which have recently been introduced by growers. Symphony and Staccato are both highly successful so far, but Sweetheart is being planted in larger numbers than either of them and looks to be a real winner. Just one problem if you go cherry-picking this summer: how do you stop yourself eating them all? One expert who's been picking all her life told me, eat a cherry, suck the stone, and keep it on your tongue. It stops you putting any more in. That way, you end up with at least a handful of this delicious fruit in your basket.
Part 3.
OK, welcome back to the programme. Well, for the 100,000 or more people in London who buy every issue, Time Out is an invaluable guide to what's going on in the city. In its lists they can find everything from films, plays, concerts and nightclubs to exhibitions, sports, opera, dance and special events. And I'm talking now to Tony Elliott, the man who started it all, back in 1968. Tony, what gave you the idea?
Well, back then it was very hard to find out about those things. There were magazines. There was a magazine called What's On, which was a weekly, which is still around, rather kind of conventional in its approach. And you could look in the evening paper, or you could look in the music press, to get information. But nothing covered everything all in one place. So I perceived there was a gap, and I suppose, to some extent, I just produced a magazine for myself. And it turned out a lot of other people wanted the same thing.
At first, the magazine was just a sheet sold hand-to-hand in the street, wasn't it?
Well, I started with a few like-minded people, and we did actually put it into newsagents. People do seem to think we started as a bunch of idealistic amateurs. But I have to say that I think we were actually pretty professional from day one. It was coming out every 3 weeks, so I'd spend 3 or 4 days actually going round something like 300 newsagents. The selling in the street was partly to do with getting copies sold so that we actually had some cash. But it also had this kind of inbuilt market research thing, where you'd show people what you were doing and they go, oh, really? And a lot of people said, oh, that's a modern What's On. That's what we've been looking for.
So, did you have any publishing experience before this?
I did a regular column for a magazine at university, which was quite serious. It used to do single themes per issue, like provincial theatre or education or racialism. And then when I took it over, I promptly changed it into being a kind of a contemporary arts magazine. We did interviews with artists, rock stars, writers, people like that.
Were you still at university when you started Time Out?
Yeah. Technically, I was actually on holiday for the summer vacation, and as far as the university was concerned, I was supposed to be going to France to teach. I think I told them I would do, because, you go away for a term or a year if you're studying French, and, then I just started doing the magazine.
And you didn't go back?
Yes, well, there was a point when I suddenly realised that I was doing what I wanted to do.
So it soon took off, didn't it? I mean, it was monthly first, and then it went weekly, didn't it, in a very short time?
Well, it started monthly, and then we went 3 weekly. For some reason, that was the highest frequency we could do. Then we went fortnightly, which is quite a valid frequency for publication, and then inevitably we went weekly. Stimulated, I have to say, by the threat of some competition from some people who were starting a similar publication.
Oh, yes, I was going to say, someone else must have spotted the gap. I mean, you identified it, but there must have been big publishing houses who thought, oh, hang on, we can have some of this too.
Yeah, I think the truth is nobody really realised what the significance of the magazine was, because, in a sense, it started very tiny, very small, and then built up, and a lot of publishers and a lot of advertisers also were very, dismissive of our readers. I mean, still, even today, you get occasional accusations like, it's not a particularly significant readership, and a lot of students read it, don't they? Things like that. People just didn't realise that, we were creating a readership that was very significant.
The readership's grown up with you as well, hasn't it? A lot of people, I imagine, who were buying it as students in the 60s are now buying it as parents of teenage children these days.
Oh, well, that would imply our readership's now older, which isn't the case. And although the numbers have expanded, but it's true that there are more people over 35 buying it than there were when it started, the readership hasn't really changed. It's still basically intelligent young people who do things.
OK, well, we'll take a quick break now, and then I'll be back to talk to Tony some more.
Part 4. Hello, I'm Stella Prime and I'm a mountaineer. I'm here to tell you about climbing Mount Everest in the Himalayas, the world's highest mountain. I was first bitten by the climbing bug when, as a journalist, I accompanied an expedition on the northeast ridge of Everest some years back. I wanted to write about what made mountaineers tick, and over the couple of months I spent with the expedition, I began to understand the sense of freedom and achievement that mountaineering brings, and I did lots of personal learning and exploration too. I think they were the happiest 2 months of my life. Over the next 3.5 years, I honed my newly acquired climbing skills on various mountains all over the world. People say, weren't your family surprised by this new interest? Well, they weren't, because I'd already done numerous similar activities of the sort people like to call adventure sports, hand gliding, scuba diving and so on. Anyway, eventually I gave up my job, let out my flat and joined the British Everest expedition. To prepare physically for this, I trained at my local gym. That was the easy part. The bit I found trickier was the mental preparation, and I'd learnt that whilst you have to be physically fit, that is really only half the story. And there were lots of things that frightened me about Everest. One of them was the icefall that you have to climb through. A friend asked if there was any way I could prepare myself for it. I thought, well, what can I do? Put myself in a fridge and look at lumps of ice? Everest is certainly not a place for cowards, and it's also certainly not a place for life's luxuries. You don't carry anything that isn't necessary because weight multiplies at high altitudes. The first time I went, as a journalist, I carried my perfume all the way, but it wasn't necessary. You can forget baths and showers on a mountain as well. On my second trip, I didn't even take my toothbrush above 7,000 metres. The only source of water is melted snow. To melt snow, you need fuel, and fuel is heavy, so you don't melt snow unless you're going to drink it. The question I'm asked most often is, how did you feel when you reached the summit? Well, I still get emotional when I think about it. Neither of the two climbers with me had been to the top before either. It was tremendously exciting, obviously, but I think the overriding thing we all felt was a great sense of satisfaction. That is the thing that stays with me when I look back. Since then, I've gone on to climb a number of other summits, and I plan to tackle Mount Fuji later this year. And of course, I've got my new career in TV as a presenter on the programme Tomorrow's World. I'm in demand on the lecturing circuit, and my book about my ascent of Everest, Aiming High, is a bestseller. So, that's my story. Now, does anyone have any questions?